What is electricity? And how do we learn to capture and use this strange natural phenomenon to power so many aspects of our daily life? In this video, we're exploring the origins of our understanding of electricity with one of the early machines used by inventors like Ben Franklin to artificially create the power of lightning and then literally capture it in a bottle. In one of our previous videos, we explored the myth of the Baghdad battery, a potential ancient device that was accidentally created that could generate electricity as a simple battery. While that myth was a bit fanciful and likely dubious, in this video we're exploring the way that humanity first began to understand and use electricity, and recreate the first device that was then known as a battery. In the ancient world, there were a handful of natural examples of electricity that were known. Lightning, a few varieties of fish that could generate an electric shock, and a weird phenomenon when you rub different materials together. Although the last one is where we get the name electricity. The origin of the word comes from this, amber, or as the Greek called it, electron. Ancient Greeks observed a strange property when amber was rubbed against cloth or fur, something caused that item to then attract small objects to stick to it. The understanding of electricity remained mostly just a curiosity until experiments in the 17th and 18th century began to solidify our understanding of this phenomenon. In 1650, Otto van Guericke discovered that by rubbing his hands on a sulfur ball while being spun, it would generate an electrical charge. It made the first electrostatic generator. In the next century, improvements were made to the device by switching to a glass ball, adding a rubber of woolen material, and the addition of a metal collector, all of which helped increase the amount of charge generated. These early devices would prove invaluable to furthering our understanding of electricity. So before attempting to build our own, we paid a visit to a local museum to learn more about some of these groundbreaking devices.
We're at the Backe Museum today, and more specifically we're in the artifact vault of the Backe Museum. My name is Adrian Fischer. I'm the curator of exhibits and collections at the Backe Museum. The Backe Museum's mission is to inspire a passion for innovation by exploring the potential for science, technology, and the humanities to make the world a better place. Our founder, as you may have guessed by the name, Backe Museum, was Earl Bakken. He was the co-founder of Medtronic, and in the early days of Medtronic, he started a program that started collecting devices and rare books. The topic of the collection at the very beginning was the intersection of the history of electricity and magnetism and the life sciences and medicine. We're now kind of broadened a little bit our scope, but we're more focusing now on inspiration and innovation. We have a lot of electrotherapeutic devices here and electrostatic devices.
So we're interested in the origin of electricity and trying to make some of the first forms of it. And you have some examples of some of these devices. You want to explain what they do?
Yeah, so we have quite a few pieces from the second half of the 18th century when electrostatics was kind of rediscovered, more or less, or there was a heightened interest in electrostatics and what it can do.
It looks like we have some electrostatic generators here.
Yes, quite a few. So this is called a cylinder electrostatic generator, called that because it had a glass cylinder as a centerpiece, right? It's a very simple kind of device. It has a crank that's connected to the cylinder, so if you crank the crank, the cylinder is rotating. And usually you have a piece of cloth or a piece of leather that's kind of rubbing on the cylinder.
Is that like what we see right here?
That's exactly what we see here, just in a smaller version. Okay. As you turn it, it creates friction, and hence an electrostatic charge. And that electrostatic charge then usually is picked up by combs, little needle-like kind of pieces that are not quite touching the cylinder but are very close. And they essentially transfer the charge to those collectors, those big kind of tubes.
Developed around the same time period was a second device called the Leyden jar, which was discovered to be able to capture and store the charge generated from an electrostatic generator. The early forms of Leyden jar was just a glass bottle with an insulated rod inserted through the top of it. Later versions found that it could be improved by covering the inside and out with metal foil in place of water.
So you would touch essentially the top ball of a Leyden jar to these kind of balls here, and then the charge essentially is transferred to the Leyden jar. And then you can take it anywhere. And so we have a number of Leyden jars. They're named after the town in the Netherlands where they were invented. They work in conjunction with the electrostatic generator. You crank the generator and then through friction create an electrostatic charge. And you can capture that charge using a Leyden jar. You essentially connect the top part of the Leyden jar to the collector, the brass kind of tube on the electrostatic generator.
In some of his experiments, Ben Franklin would combine multiple Leyden jars and refer to them as a battery, comparing them to a battery or grouping of artillery. Combining multiple jars, he was able to discharge an even larger electric charge.
And you can actually combine multiple Leyden jars into a battery kind of set, and they can then really kind of create very, very strong discharges.
although likely the first and possible origin of the term electric battery, and sharing some similarities with its ability to store an electric charge. By today's definition, the Leyden jar is technically not a battery.
They're not batteries, they're technically capacitors. They work by essentially the potential between the in and the outside. So there's foil on the inside, foil on the outside. The top part is connected to the foil on the inside. The charge can go up into the tens of thousands of volts.
With a better understanding of some of the designs of these two devices, now it's time to actually build them ourselves. First up, one of the most important components of each device needs to be made out of what is called a dielectric compound, such as glass. For the electrostatic generator, we will need the globe or drum that spins in the device, and in the Leyden jar, we will need what is basically just an open-faced jar. So for some help forming these glass items, we got some help from some experts at the Losee Glass Studio.
I'm Claire, I work at Losee Minnesota Center for Glass Arts. We're going to be making a Leyden jar. So it's going to start off by getting our first gather of glass from our melting furnace. So this is a starter bubble. It's how any blown vessel begins. I just trapped the breath into the end of the pipe. The heat expanded that air and created a little bubble. So now this glass is hollow. In order to make a larger piece, we have to let the glass cool off, and then I can go back to the furnace and get a second layer over this, create a larger form. So able to wind on about 2 to 3 times the amount of glass I started out with. I'm just gonna make sure that this glass is nice and even on all sides before I start to actually shape the jar itself, using a tool called the block. And that soft air is traveling through the pipe, but it's heating up as it gets closer to the glass, which is causing it to expand quite a bit more. So a lot of glass blowing is controlling temperature. The tip of the bubble that's on this marver is going to be the base of the jar. So I'm just really cooling the bottom third so that when I blow it, it expands the shoulder of the piece. Go ahead and blow. On. Off. So at this point, I'm done with the bottom half of the piece, so I'm going to transfer it to a new rod so I can work on the top half of the jar. I have to introduce a lot more heat back into it, closer to 2,000 degrees than the maybe 1,200 it's at now, so that I can flare it open and turn it into the jar shape. So I'm just stabilizing the temperature, and then Isaac's getting geared up. We're going to carry it over to that table, and then we'll torch the little scar mark away.
With the Leyden jar now completed, next up is a drum for the electrostatic generator.
Because we're doing a drum, we're just going to shape this up using the block. This is the second gather of glass. So because we're going back into the furnace, I just expanded the bubble a little bit more so it wouldn't collapse on itself when I go and get that third gather of glass. I think so.
But first, quick word from today's sponsor, Keeps. 2 out of 3 guys will experience male pattern baldness by the time they're 35. If that's something you're concerned about, then you might be interested in today's sponsor. Keeps offers the only 2 FDA-approved hair loss treatments out there, and has more 5-star reviews than any of its competitors. Getting and using it is really simple. Consult with a medical professional online and get it delivered straight to your home. Best way to prevent baldness is to combat it while you still have hair. If you're ready to take action and prevent hair loss, go to keeps.com/HTME and click the link in the description to get a special offer. That's keeps.com/HTME. Alright, so we got our glass cylinder all made and annealed. Now we just need to build a wood frame for it to hold it and then spin it. To put a nice finish to the wood, I can use the walnut juice I saved from many years ago to give it a very nice dark stain. Then for a protective finish, a wood finish can be made from a combination of olive oil and beeswax. Next, for the rubbing material, we can felt some wool. Then to cast the metal collector comb in brass. I also got everything polished up and ready to do the final assembly with. Just use some hide glue to glue all the pieces in. Need to drill a few more holes to hold the brass piece so we have cast now. So should be ready to put it all together. Now for the Leyden jar, we need to apply some metal foil on the inside and outside of the glass. For that, we can start with some tin, melt it as flat as possible, and then to turn it into actual foil, it's just as simple as hammering it super thin. Then just need to glue it onto the glass. Alright, so we have everything glued together now, and we have our electrostatic generator. I had some issues with the glue, trying to get the wood to stick to the glass. It was a little bit of a challenge. It took a few different layers, but I think we got something pretty solid now. Felt here is rubbing up against the glass, and we have our Leyden jar. This is the very first version of it, where it's just basically a cup of water with a metal rod insulated with a wood lid. And together with this, we should be able to capture electricity. Got the setup here, and hopefully it should work. Nope, no zap. In theory, this should work. I've been tweaking and testing it for quite a bit and gotten kind of intermittent results. This is the equivalent of rubbing your feet on the carpet and touching something metal. It's surprisingly difficult to get it to work in just a basic machine, it seems. But I have been able to get it to work a few times, so I'll crank it up again and see if we can get it to work. Made a few different improvements that supposedly should make things a little bit better. Put some silk on top of our wool. It seems to be a material more willing to give up the electrons and generate a little bit more of the charge. I rebuilt the comb to be just a little bit bigger and hopefully able to collect a little bit more. And then we have a ground wire here, just a wire that's touching the cloth and running all the way to the stake in the ground, just to kind of keep this guy neutral. We have the two different versions of Leyden jars here. We can try and charge those up and see if we can get a visible static shock. I have a little electrometer here too, and this will show if there's any charge contained on anything. Once we get this charged, it's either going to pull them in or push them away. Let's give it a shot. All right, let's see if we get any discharge. I heard there's an audible discharge there, but not enough to actually see. All right, you can tell we definitely got a little bit more of a charge this time. Still just audible. All right, let's try the other Leyden jar. All right, so after a lot of cranking, you're able to get at least a little bit of a zap, and just accidentally touching the inside and outside of the Leyden jar, I can tell you, it definitely has a voltage. I can feel a decent shock coming from it. So that is electricity, and that is basically the same as what you see in the sky during a lightning storm. So the electrostatic machine was very important for understanding electricity, but overall it doesn't really have a whole lot of use. The Leyden jar was also very helpful, but it does come back later as a value as a capacitor later on in electronics. These experiments in the 18th century really helped expand the knowledge of electricity. Probably think of Ben Franklin and his experiment with flying a kite. He did do that, it wasn't really struck by lightning. He just flew a kite up into a statically charged thunderstorm. He was actually able to attach that to a Leyden jar and charge it. And that experiment was done because he wanted to know if the lightning we're seeing here is the same as what we see in the sky. And the answer is yes. We are basically recreating the exact same process that happens naturally in the sky. We have a little bit more knowledge of what exactly is happening, and it has to do with electrons being shared between the different materials. When the friction is applied, electrons are being given up by whatever's being rubbed on, in this case silk, and the glass drum acts as an insulator, so it allows those electrons to stay on the surface and not react with anything else. And then with the metal comb, we have that transfer of electrons, allowing us to easily transfer the displaced electrons, which can then be stored in a Leyden jar. And the Leyden jar works because of the insulator of the glass that separates the inside and outside. We're able to put a positive and a negative charge on each side of the Leyden jar with the insulation separating them. And once you connect the two separated sides, they balance out and you get an electric shock. And in the sky, that's exactly what happens with lightning. Air is insulator between the ground and a differently charged sky, where the friction between the clouds is causing a static buildup, which is then discharged, sent to the ground through lightning. Next up in our video, we're going to be exploring kind of the alternative to static electricity, which is current electricity, where static electricity is a very abrupt discharge of everything at once. Current is a very consistent flow of electricity, and it's a type of electricity we're more familiar with. So that's what we'll be exploring pretty soon here with the voltaic pile. Thank you again to all of our supporters on Patreon. Thanks for watching. Thanks again to Eads for sponsoring this video. Check them out for simple and effective hair loss treatment delivered straight to your door. The best way to combat hair loss is while you still have hair. Click the link in the description to get a special offer. That's keeps.com/htme. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe and check out other content we have covering a wide variety of topics. Also, if you've enjoyed these series, consider supporting us on Patreon. We are largely a fan-funded channel and depend on the support of our viewers in order to keep our series going. Thanks for watching.